Scarborough Centre and across Toronto by Project Engagement. Project Engagement is a volunteer-based, not-for-profit organization founded in 2004 by our local city councillor, Michael Thompson, and businessman Vince Gasparo. Their goal was to create an organization that would provide food, clothing, and other household necessities to families in need in Scarborough and across Toronto. I'm pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that they have succeeded in making a real difference. This past Christmas, I was pleased to join more than 600 community volunteers preparing food hampers to help ensure more than 400 families had a better Christmas, including a warm meal and toys for the children. Mr. Speaker, Project Engagement is making a real difference in the lives of families in need. We need more projects like these across Canada. Thank you.
The honourable member for Barrie-Innisfil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Mr. Bruce McGregor. Bruce is the past president of our local Conservative EDA, and after an unprecedented 5 terms at the helm of our local riding association, Bruce turned over the reins to Mrs. Ann Kell at our AGM held over the weekend. Bruce has been a proud resident of Barrie for 45 years, and his dedication to the EDA is only surpassed by his unwavering commitment to the greater Conservative movement. Barrie-Innisfil can be very proud of Bruce's service to the community, and we thank him from the bottom of our hearts and wish him all the best in the future. Mr. Speaker, I know I speak for all members of this House when I say how important our volunteers are to our success. It's their passion, energy, and sacrifice that allow us all to serve. We couldn't do it without them. Thank you, Bruce McGregor, and thank you to his wife, Pat, as well.
The honourable member for Sydney Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as we mourn the loss of Charlie Kagan. Mr. Kagan served as a councillor for the town of North Sydney and the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. He was also a school board representative. Besides being an elected official and working for Marine Atlantic for 35 years, he devoted much of his time to helping many volunteer groups throughout the community. One of his crowning achievements was the work he done on revitalizing Indian Beach. Last Saturday, my wife Pam and I attended a very touching funeral at St. Joseph's Church. Reverend Patrick O'Neill gave a wonderful service and over 300 people attended. Former Premier Russell McClellan, along with representatives from the 3 levels of government, were also in attendance. The Knights of Columbus and the Royal Canadian Legion, who Charlie was both a member of, acted as an honour guard at his funeral. So I ask all members to join me in showing our appreciation for Charlie's many contributions to our community.
The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, a recent study by Oxfam showed 62 of the world's richest billionaires have as much wealth as half the world's population. Evidence that the gap between the rich and the rest of us continues to grow. Income and wealth inequality is one of the biggest challenges of our time. Instead of tackling this challenge head-on, the Liberal government is making it worse. Last week's PBO report revealed most Canadians won't benefit at all from the Liberals' so-called middle-class tax cut. In fact, the report confirmed the Liberals' plan benefits the top 30%, and the richest 10% is getting the most. Like the Conservatives before them, the Liberals are increasing economic inequality. In my riding of Port Moody Coquitlam, constituents are feeling the financial pain of exorbitant housing costs, expensive childcare, prescription drugs, and groceries. Many are struggling just to pay the bills. We in the NDP will continue to work with civil society, business, labour, community groups, and individual Canadians to advance fairer and more prosperous Canada for all Canadian families, not just the richest few.
The honourable member for Scarborough Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to rise in the House today to recognize the month of January as Crime Stoppers Month. Since first being implemented in the great city of Calgary in 1982, the Crime Stoppers program has become an invaluable crime prevention tool in over 90 communities across Canada. This program is a unique partnership between the public, the local media, and the police to fulfill our shared responsibility to maintain public safety, reduce crime, and to prevent victimization. Since its inception, Crime Stoppers has helped solve over 300,000 cases and resulted in the recovery of over $500 million of contraband property. but its greatest contribution is in the prevention of crime. Mr. Speaker, fear is the greatest enemy of public safety, and by empowering our citizens to provide information to the police anonymously and safely, Crime Stoppers discourages criminals who rely on fear and intimidation to victimize others. Crime Stoppers Month is an opportunity to raise awareness of this important program and to express our admiration and gratitude to the many staff and volunteers who assist our dedicated police services in keeping Canada safe.
The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, it's great to be back in the House after a busy few weeks in my riding at Caribou, Prince George. Today, I have the honour of welcoming to the House two regional leaders, Sherry Ogasawara and Tracy Calagaros. Well, while the Prime Minister was busy taking selfies with movie stars, I and three of my colleagues attended the BC Premier's Natural Resource Forum, one of the largest forums of its kind in Canada. The forum was held in Prince George, BC. The event was attended by over 900 leading industry professionals, provincial, municipal representatives, and Indigenous leaders. Mr. Speaker, this government's absence and silence was heard loud and clear. I'm greatly disappointed that not one member of the Liberal Party was present, not even the member opposite, the Minister of Natural Resources, the very minister who just yesterday stood up in the House and said he was meeting with industry leaders and yet declined the invitation to attend one of the largest natural resources event in the country. So I offer this to my colleagues. While you may want us to be known for...
The honourable member for Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, today I stand to recognise a special person that has spent the last 40 years providing emergency services to a rural area in my riding. At the age of 78, Ms. Rita Pennell of Trepassey has just retired. She was a pillar of strength to those requiring emergency services, and many took comfort knowing that Ms. Pennell was either driving them to the hospital or carefully attending their needs. Just recently, I had the privilege to visit Ms. Pennell at her home and listen to her many interesting stories. It became obvious that she cared for every patient as if they were her family. She was determined and made sure that anyone needing care got it. If a snowstorm was getting in her way, she had the Cabinet Minister's personal phone number and used it to make sure the roads were cleared. Ms. Pennell was recently recognised by the Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador for her efforts. While she retired as an EMS, she remains a very active volunteer in her community and works hard to make Trepassey a great place to live. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me.
The honourable member for Oakville.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honour to advise the House that a 92-year-old resident of Oakville, Edward James Kersey, has been awarded France's highest order, the rank of Knight of the French National Order of the Legion of Honour. Reverend Kersey joined the Canadian Army on January 24, 1943. He came ashore at Juno Beach on July 10, 1944, and fought in battles through France, Belgium, Holland, and was with his unit in Oldenburg, Germany when the war ended. His efforts and personal bravery helped to ensure that today, Canada and France are democratic and free societies. This award attests to his courage and his devotion to the ideals of liberty and peace, and for this we all owe Reverend Kersey a great debt of gratitude. As a Knight of the Legion of Honour, he joins an international order that has been instrumental in creating a stronger, fairer, and more just world. Thank you and congratulations, Reverend Kersey.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, since the City of Quebec was founded, its port has always been key to the economic life of Quebec. It means where the river narrows, and that is especially true because it is the last deep water port on the St. Lawrence for cargo ships, and it is the closest to our cities. In 2015, the project Beauport 2020 was announced and will create 3,000 new jobs, and it will allow it to remain competitive on the international scene. The extension of the wharf line and the regreening of the river shore are necessary for economic stimulation of the Quebec City region. A large part of it is in my riding of Beauport-Limoilou. Therefore, I urge the current government to support the measures that the port is taking for Beauport 2020 because it is a vision of the future for Beauport. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate a Canadian Olympic athlete who is world-class, and he was born in Deux-Montagnes in my riding. Last weekend in Val-Saint-Côme, the mogul skier Michael Kingsbury broke a record with his 30th World Cup victory. Mr. Kingsbury is 23 years old and has already won numerous victories, including a silver medal at the Sochi Olympics and 4 Crystal Globes in his mogul skiing. Mr. Kingsbury, I would like to take this opportunity to underscore your efforts and your perseverance. You are an inspiration and example of courage and of success for young athletes across the country. Let us be proud of our Canadian athletes. Congratulations, Mr. Kingsbury, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Mr. Speaker, last Monday, the second Canadian Infrastructure Report Card was released by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and Partners. What that report card tells us is sobering, that fully 1/3 of all municipal infrastructure in Canada today is in fair, poor, or very poor condition, and that figure includes much-needed transit assets. Transit represents a significant investment for all Canadians, and we need to ensure that we allocate appropriate spending to keep Canadians moving. In my region, BC's Lower Mainland, this is a particularly relevant issue as we will be welcoming an estimated 1 million new residents and 600,000 new jobs by 2040. Investments in public transit not only help get people to their destinations quickly and efficiently, but also support a competitive economy, a clean environment, and a higher quality of life. I encourage all members of this House to work with other levels of government in Canada to invest in much-needed transit infrastructure, including the expansion of light rail transit to my riding in Cloverdale, Langley City. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, almost 2 years ago, the Russian Federation illegally invaded, occupied, and annexed the internationally recognized Ukrainian territory of Crimea. The Putin regime executed the military takeover in response to the Euromaidan protests by the Ukrainian people against their pro-Russian leader, Viktor Yanukovych. The placement of armed forces in the sovereign territory of another nation is a clear violation of international norms and laws. The previous Conservative government was a world leader in providing economic, military, and diplomatic assistance to our Ukrainian allies. We made it extremely clear that whether it takes 5 months or 50 years, Canada will never, ever recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea. Today, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said, "We have nothing to give. We're not holding any talks with anyone on returning Crimea." Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister wants to reward the Russian Federation by normalizing relations while the Russian regime is supplying arms and troops in the Donbas conflict in eastern Ukraine. I'm calling on the government to maintain all sanctions against the Russian Federation and individuals responsible for the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of the Donbass.
The Honourable Member for La Salle-et-Mont-Verdun. Mr. Speaker, in 2013, Mylène Paquette, who resides in the riding of La Salle-et-Mont-Verdun, became the first person to complete a solo row across the North Atlantic Ocean from Canada to France. Thanks to her remarkable courage and her perseverance throughout this difficult journey, she prompted other people to overcome their fears and various obstacles and to devote themselves to physical fitness. She became a source of pride and inspiration for many people, both in Canada and abroad. She was recognized in December, Mr. Speaker, by the Governor-General of Canada. As Member of Parliament, I would like to congratulate Ms. Paquette, and I invite the House of Commons to recognize Ms. Paquette's feat, who is a great lady from Verdun and from Canada. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Beskinonge. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to take this opportunity to remind the Liberal government of how important protecting our supply management is. We have to solve the problem of the milk proteins that are crossing our border. We want to work with dairy producers to solve this problem within the first 100 days. The Liberals also promised to act. Tomorrow, this government will have been sitting for 100 days, and dairy producers across the country are waiting for concrete measures to be taken by this government. And I certainly hope that the dairy producers will not have to live with this uncertainty for another 100 days. In my riding and across the country, farmers are worried and impatient. Currently, medium-sized farms are losing $1,000 per week. That is unacceptable. Taking into account that our producers are living in uncertainty with regard to the TPP, I would ask the government to act now concerning milk proteins in order to save our farms.
Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to extend my personal condolences to the people of La Loche. The recent tragedy has broken the hearts of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. As parents and family members, we can all easily identify with the horror and the grief of this tragedy. I think it also breaks our hearts, Mr. Speaker, because we all know that life in isolated northern communities can be challenging, but that unfortunately, generations of politicians have ignored the depth of those challenges. Mr. Speaker, I would like the people of La Loche, all of those touched by this tragedy, to know that all of us in this House are keeping them in our hearts and our prayers. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, an entire nation is doing so. May God bless the people of La Loche.
The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, last week the greater community of Sussex, New Brunswick, my hometown, was devastated to learn that 430 mining jobs in the community would be lost due to market prices and production costs. Potash Corporations of Saskatchewan will be suspending the potash mining operations indefinitely at the Piccadilly mining site. The people of Sussex have been quick to show an attitude of strength and resilience. There's a confidence and sense of hope in the value of our natural resources, the strength of our municipalities, and the tremendous skills and work ethic of our workforce. As a Member of Parliament for Fundy Royal, I'm committed to supporting these workers and their families, as well as the local businesses that have been impacted. Now more than ever, this government's infrastructure investments will be important to provide immediate work and also to ensure that we are prepared to take advantage of future private investments that will create long-term jobs. Mr. Speaker, every local success story that this government can support will add stability to the community and help us to retain the workforce that we need for prosperity in New Brunswick.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Prime Minister for taking my advice and meeting with Mr. Coderre. This is an issue about the national economy, and it's about jobs for all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, there are actually other projects, though, that can create jobs. For example, if the Liberals would allow the expansion of the Toronto Island Airport runway, Bombardier would have a big new customer for their made-in-Canada C-Series jets, and it wouldn't cost a cent. Why is the Prime Minister standing in the way of aerospace jobs?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question. It allows me to repeat that we took an undertaking during the last election to the people of Toronto who care about the development of their waterfront that we would not reopen the tripartite agreement. And we have kept that promise, and we're very proud of it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Defence Minister said in November that Canadians needn't fear ISIS. But since his comments, we've had ISIS-inspired jihadist attacks in Paris, in Istanbul, in Beirut, in Jakarta, where 1 Canadian was killed, and in Burkina Faso, where 6 Canadians were murdered by terrorists. Does the Prime Minister agree with his Defence Minister that ISIS is not a threat to Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, as I stated, the threat of ISIL is real. But however, as leaders of the nation, we need to give confidence to our Canadians that our institution, our security services will protect them, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to ISIS, the Prime Minister does not back his own words on diversity with action. One of the greatest threats on the planet to cultural and religious freedom, to the rights of women, to the rights of gays and lesbians is the Islamic State. So it's one thing to give speeches on diversity from a Swiss ski resort. It's another to fight for the people whose lives are threatened by terrorists and murderers in Iraq and Syria because of their diversity. How can the Prime Minister say that he cares about diversity but then leave the fight for others?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, with the plan we're preparing, Canada will be stronger to support our coalition to fight this terrorist group, the so-called Islamic State. We will do it with pride and courage, as Canada must do everywhere in the world when it's the time to fight terrorism.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're happy to see that the Prime Minister followed up on our recommendation we made yesterday, and that this morning he met with his good old Liberal friend. And we hope, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister talked about the economy and about pipelines that will create some 3,000 jobs and will have $1 billion in spin-offs. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is a member for Papineau in Montreal. In the government, there are Quebecers. Does that government commit to defending the economy of Quebec by proposing and promoting this pipeline project, which is good for the Quebec and Canadian economy? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will defend the economic interests of all Canadians, whether they live in Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Quebec, or Newfoundland. Mr. Speaker, the building of major infrastructure projects is very important to the Canadian economy as we look at ways of moving our natural resources sustainably to tidewater, Mr. Speaker. This is the message that we have been giving to Canadians regardless of what region in which they live.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, is the government aware that that project will make it possible to feed the 2 refineries that are located in Quebec? Does the government know or realize that that approach will help the oil industry in Quebec? It's some 70,000 significant jobs in Quebec. Will the government speak on behalf of and defend the Quebec economy?
Natural resources.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are aware of how important the natural resource sector is in Canada to creating jobs. We also know that at the moment there are particular regions in the country that are hurting because of job losses, because of commodity prices, in particular in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and as my colleague has just said, also in New Brunswick. And we're also aware that major projects are good for the country, but they must carry the confidence of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Mr. Speaker, today the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal issued a scathing decision confirming the systemic discrimination against First Nations children and families that continues to this day. Will the Prime Minister act immediately to right this wrong by instructing the government lawyers not to appeal today's decision, and will he commit to the necessary funding in the budget so that we can begin to reverse this history of discrimination, colonialism, and racism in Canadian institutions?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, we want to acknowledge the decision of the tribunal today, acknowledge the leadership and advocacy of Cindy Blackstock and the Assembly of First Nations and Indigenous Peoples. It's a 180-page document. Certainly we will take careful reading of it, but understand and recognize that there will likely not be any reason why we would seek judicial review of this decision. We can and must do better, and we will renovate the child welfare system in this country.
The honourable member for Outremont.
There is no reason to appeal this decision. Today as well, Environment Commissioner of Canada lambasted the current regulatory system for pipelines. Now, during the campaign, the Liberal leader made a very clear commitment to overhaul the environmental assessment process, and he promised that new regulations would apply to, quote, existing projects as well, and that the entire assessment process of current projects would have to be, quote, redone. Are the Liberals going to respect that very clear promise to change the rules and make sure these assessments are redone?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to answer my first question as representative of the residents of Ottawa Centre. We are committed to rebuilding the trust of Canadians in our environmental assessment process, trust that was lost under the previous Conservative government. But as part of that, we will be informing our decisions through consultations with Canadians. We will be basing our decisions on evidence and science in consultation with Indigenous people and with input from the public. We will also be considering the impact of climate change. Thank you.
The honourable member for Outremont.
Answer the question. Rebuilding the trust begins with keeping your promises.
That's not what they promised during the election campaign. Twice during the campaign, the Liberal leader promised that all of the verifications and assessments on pipelines would be redone. Not simply patching them up, no. So the question is yes or no. Will they respect their promises with respect to the environmental assessments and doing them over? The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the commitments that we made as a government was to reestablish the confidence of Canadians in the environmental assessment process. This is the only way to move our resources in a responsible way in this century, and we will do that, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Outremont.
Another attempt to change the subject. The promise made during the election campaign was to redo the environmental assessments for Kinder Morgan, Energy East, and the government is now backing down on that as well, Mr. Speaker. What's more, another commitment was to help people in need. Now, do you realize that only 1/3 of all Canadians are eligible for employment insurance when they lose their jobs? The Conservatives refused to bring the eligibility threshold to 360 hours. Will the Liberals act face... The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to be able to respond, to indicate to the House and all Canadians that we're in an active review of employment insurance standards and will maintain and honour our commitments during the election.
Honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the UN recently put out a report that found that ISIS is holding close to 3,500 people in captivity as slaves, mainly from the minority Yazidis community. ISIS is responsible for nearly 18,000 deaths and the displacement of over 3 million Iraqis alone. Previous governments have acted on the United Nations responsibility to protect. Yet we see no plan at all from this government to stop the genocide in Syria and Iraq. Why is the Prime Minister outsourcing Canada's obligation to protect the innocent?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
I want to reassure my colleagues it's the opposite that we will do. We'll fight very strongly against the so-called Islamic State with determination for the reasons you just mentioned, and we'll do it in a more effective way than it was in the past. It's what we will do. We'll work with the coalition to be sure that Canada will add to the coalition and will not duplicate. We'll be strong and we will be resolute in supporting our allies.
Colleagues, I'm having a little bit of noise from a certain side. If we could have less of that, that'd be good. Honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of National Defence said in a radio interview of our allies Of course they want us to keep our CF-18s there. So, Mr. Speaker, our allies want us to leave our CF-18s in the fight against ISIS. Canadians want us to leave our fighter jets in the fight. Why are the only people who want us to stop bombing ISIS the Prime Minister and ISIS?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most important things when dealing with a conflict like this is to get a good situation of what's happening on the ground. We can actually see, because they didn't have a good assessment of the situation, why we're actually in this mess. And so that's why I'm taking the time to do a thorough assessment of making sure that we get this right and we have the appropriate capability that's going to actually make it more effective. I've done this in the past and we'll do this again. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Parry Sound, Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, there was a report today that indicates that when the Prime Minister met with Vladimir Putin in Turkey, they both expressed a desire to normalize relations. But that's not what we heard from the Prime Minister when he reported to Canadians in the aftermath of that meeting. Now we hear Russia's foreign minister who wants Canada to ease up on its unwavering support for the people of Ukraine. Why is the government of Canada turning its back on the people of Ukraine? Why is the Prime Minister playing footsie with Putin?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Canada will always be there for Ukraine. We do not accept the interference and invasion of Russia in Ukraine, and we'll find the most effective way to say that to the government of Russia.
Bravo! The Honourable Member for Parry Sound, Muskoka.
Monsieur le Président, il était...
Mr. Speaker, it was reported that Bombardier is attempting to do business in Iran despite the fact that Canada has strict sanctions in place. These sanctions are there for legitimate reasons, for the threat to Israel and because of support for terrorism. Does Bombardier know something that the rest of Canada doesn't? Has the government already lifted sanctions against Iran? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, it's true that the UN has asked for the sanctions to be lifted that are in place so that Iran doesn't use nuclear technology for military purposes. Canada will ensure that the regime does not return to nuclear technology. It is with our eyes open, therefore, that we are going to respond to this report from the United Nations.
Member for Thornhill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, Iran has a long history as a bad actor in the Middle East. Iran provides military assistance to the Assad regime in Syria. Iran's supreme leader routinely threatens the destruction of Israel. And, Mr. Speaker, reopening our Canadian mission in Tehran would put Canadian foreign service workers at risk. So, Mr. Speaker, will the government abandon plans to normalize relations with Iran and keep sanctions in place?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, with the misleading approach of the former government, Canada is not there in Iran, and it's not good for the people of Iran. It's not good for the promotion of human rights. It's not good for our strategic interests in the region. It's not good for Israel. It's good for nobody will change this policy.
That's it. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Well, and we've seen that Iran is very selective in the way it protects foreign diplomatic missions. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering today whether the Minister of Foreign Affairs is more willing today than yesterday to explicitly condemn the incitement by Palestinian leaders for deadly attacks against Israeli civilians. I wonder whether the Minister's reluctance has anything to do with his stated intention that Canada return to be an honest broker in the Middle East, a return, Mr. Speaker, to the discredited liberal philosophy of moral equivalence of Palestinian terrorists and Israeli victims. Will the Minister stand today and condemn the
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Canada has been, is, and will always be a friend of Israel, Mr. Speaker. What will not happen anymore is the attempt of the opposition, of the Conservative Party, to make it a partisan issue in Canada.
That's right.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi Bay James Nunavik. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal confirmed today what Aboriginal communities have long known too long. Children of First Nations families living on reserve need more assistance. The Department of Justice has used multiple tactics in order to derail the process and to deny the reality affecting so many children. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Justice confirm today that the historic decision will not be appealed? Yes or no? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for the question. As I said, the judgment is 180 pages, and we are undertaking to do our due diligence and review that decision. But I cannot anticipate anything within that decision that will make cause for me to file for judicial review. This is about equality. Our government is committed to equality and committed to taking and assisting and working with First Nations to ensure that every child has the opportunity to succeed.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, the eyes of the children in our Parliament today as they look to us to see how we are going to end the policies that have led to too many Indigenous families broken up, too many children denied access to everything from emergency dental care to proper wheelchairs. For Indigenous children in this country, this is how the system works. Government's balancing the books on children who are considered not worthy of protecting. So my question is to the President of the Treasury Board. This is a legally binding rule. What is his plan to weed out the systemic negligence that runs through all the key departments of the federal government? What is his plan for action?
Here. The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
I thank the member for his question and for his advocacy. As you know, every member of this government, every minister has in its mandate letter the relationship with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people as a very serious issue. The absolutely devastating report of the tribunal today we take very, very seriously, and all members of this government will work tirelessly to make sure to right the wrongs of the past and make sure that every Indigenous child in this country has an equal start in life.
The Honourable Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer is reporting that Canadian households actually carry the highest debt load in the G7. And they say this is of concern because it actually creates a situation where Canadians are more vulnerable to economic shocks, like losing their job. Now, this applies, Mr. Speaker, to Canadian households. It also applies to our country. Who is going to max out our country's credit cards on a spending spree? It's going to be the Finance Minister, Mr. Speaker. And why is this government abandoning any fiscal sense in the form of common sense?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague. The government will ensure that the financial system or situation for households remains stable and that their debt loads are manageable. The ratio and other indicators will be examined. The government, Mr. Speaker, has recently taken steps to address the vulnerability of the housing sector by requiring additional funds to be put down, and this is a way of helping the middle class. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Milton.
This can't be a situation of do as I say, not as I do. They are clearly saying that there's a problem with respect to Canadian household debt, but they're failing to recognize that there's going to be a real problem with our country's debt if they're going to go on a fiscal spending spree. Mr. Speaker, one way to figure out what's going on in the country is to have Finance Committee pre-budget consultations as per the mandate of a parliamentary committee. None are on the horizon, Mr. Speaker. Very simple question for the government. Yes or no? Are we going to have a Finance Committee pre-budget consultation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
With the Finance Minister, we went from coast to coast to coast. We met with thousands of Canadians. Canadians have asked us to invest in innovation, productivity, look at infrastructure and export. I'm pleased to report to this House that thousands of people have also made submission online. More than 120,000 people have interacted with us online. I'd like to say, Mr. Speaker, Canadians want us to invest in the economy, and that's exactly what we're going to do for Canadians.
The honourable member for Brantford-Brant.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are losing their jobs. They're holding back investments and are on the edge about their financial futures. Yet all we hear are Liberal plans for massive spending, saying their deficits could go as high as $30 billion. Can the Finance Minister confirm that the Liberals still plan to target small business, including engineers, doctors, veterinarians, and other professionals, to finance his spending spree?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my colleague, the Honourable Member opposite, that we inherited a huge deficit, Mr. Speaker, from the Conservative government. We have a plan in order to grow the economy, and we've already begun with it, Mr. Speaker. With our mandate, we are going to respect three principles, Mr. Speaker. We will maintain the GDP to debt ratio on a decline. We will manage our expenditures with caution, and we will reestablish the budget. And that is the responsible way of acting, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Brantford-Brant.
Mr. Speaker, we left a surplus in October 2015. Those are the words of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. It's clear. The Liberal plan is spend, spend, spend. This government has already gone after families and taken away income splitting, and they cut tax-free savings account and have signaled that they will take away tax credits from students, apprentices, first-time homebuyers, and families with children in sports and arts programs. How is the Finance Minister going to pay for his massive spending? Who is next on his hit list?
I'm starting to hear noise today from more than one side. That's not a good sign, but I know we'd rather have noise from no sides. If we could all cooperate, that would help. After all, this is a crucible of democracy. It's a place for vigorous debate. It's a place where ideas are tested, but the test of an idea is not how loud the applause is or whether it's a standing ovation, and nor is it whether it can withstand rude interruption. The test is time. So with that, let's go to the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like first to apologize. I did not see that you were rising, so my apologies. I'd like to say to the honourable colleague who said there was a surplus, there was actually, Canadians do know, $115 million deficit that you left us. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to grow the economy. In December,
Mr. Speaker, we cut taxes for the middle class, and that will benefit more than 9 million taxpayers, Mr. Speaker. And that is one of the steps that we're going to be putting forth in the budget. There will also be the tax benefit for children that will benefit 9 out of 10 families. It will help lift thousands of children out of poverty, and that is what Canadians asked us to do, Mr. Speaker, to invest in the middle class, to grow the economy, and that is exactly what we're going to do.
The member for St. Albert Edmonton is a new member. St. Albert, let's see. Yes, that's right. New member, and some things not to learn from older members who've been here longer, and one of them is heckling. So let's try to avoid that. Member for the député de Rimouski.
The honourable member for Rimouski, Neigette, Témiscouata-les-Basses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Environmental Commissioner's report revealed serious deficiencies in the pipeline monitoring system. First of all, emergency plans and monitoring systems are obsolete. She also revealed that the public is being kept in the dark, and the National Energy Board is not making sure that the conditions imposed on companies are being respected. How are Canadians supposed to trust the system? When will the Liberals realize that you need more than a Band-Aid to correct this completely deficient system?
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I spoke to Commissioner Gelfand yesterday about her report, and I spoke to the chair of the National Energy Board this morning about her recommendations. I am assured by the chair that there will be instant action, as in fact it started actually quite some time ago, and it's the commitment of my department to monitor those actions to make sure that the Commissioner's recommendations are followed completely.
The honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the minister might be a bit confused because the Environment Commissioner's report pointed out in black and white how flawed and, in fact, dangerous the current NEB process is. In more than half of the cases studied, the regulator doesn't even keep track of the conditions that they impose upon pipeline companies. This Prime Minister and his MPs made explicit promises to British Columbians, so let's now see if they'll actually keep them. Will this government demand that the National Energy Board review Kinder Morgan and Energy East under new and credible processes that Canadians can finally trust?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we have said that there will be a new process of transition for those projects that are currently under review by the National Energy Board. Mr. Speaker, we have been saying that those principles and the transition period will be announced in a number of weeks. I can now say it will be in a number of days.
The honourable member for Brossard-Saint-Lambert. Mr. Speaker, our government made a commitment to improving the operations of Parliament in a significant manner. Can the government House Leader give us an update about initiatives already undertaken and inform us about the plan of action adopted by the government to bring about the desired reforms? Thank you. The Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to thank my colleague from Brossard-Saint-Lambert for her question. I regularly meet with opposition House leaders. There's even a collegial, friendly atmosphere there. I wrote to the chair of the Procedure Committee so that we could have an opportunity to come and share our ideas with the committee. He informed me that I could go this Thursday. So I'm very confident, Mr. Speaker, that together with our colleagues and support from members of the House, we can make Parliament more efficient and effective for families.
The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the minister showed that he didn't know that under our Conservative government, the first Keystone pipeline was approved and built, along with the Alberta Clipper, the Line 9B reversal, and the Anchor Loop. However, under this irresponsible Liberal government, the Keystone XL pipeline was rejected with virtually no pushback, no opposition from the Liberals, no concern as they laugh. But TransCanada isn't taking it lying down. In fact, it's challenging the U.S. decision at NAFTA. Simple question, will the government support this NAFTA challenge? Will they get behind it and be supportive of more jobs for Canadians?
The Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, at the time that the American decision was taken, the Prime Minister indicated that we regretted that decision from the government of the United States. We have also said that the decision to appeal it to a NAFTA panel is the business of the proponent and not of the Government of Canada.
The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
Shame on the government. Their previous governments have taken on NAFTA challenges. Cool is an excellent example. This government should get behind jobs and opportunity and get behind this challenge. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the minister also said that the natural resources industry leaders have just come to the realization that Aboriginal and environmental concerns are important. Does his arrogance know no bounds? Energy East has done over 500 consultations since 2013. So we have a minister who doesn't know which pipelines were built in the last 4 to 10 years. We have a minister who doesn't understand the process, and a minister who won't get behind jobs in Canada. There's a lack of confidence in this minister already.
The Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, the confidence that really matters is the confidence of Canadians in the process that we're about to improve. And rather than playing politics with pipelines, rather than trying to pit one region of the country against another, Mr. Speaker, we are going to unite Canadians who will understand that the process that we are now in transition will be a much better process than was followed by this government.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister was wrong when he said his government is working hard to create jobs. There's one important nation-building project that will create thousands of much-needed, well-paying jobs across Canada. It's Energy East. While the government ponders vague regulatory changes, hundreds of thousands of Canadians ponder how they will pay their bills this month. Mr. Speaker, does the Minister of Natural Resources realize that his wavering doesn't instill confidence and creates an unstable environment for the whole economy?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we have indicated that we understand the human consequence to job loss. We understand that the low commodity prices in the oil and gas sector and in potash has led to layoffs across the country, most recently in New Brunswick. We take that very seriously. And we also understand that moving forward, the best chance to create new jobs in the energy sector is to make sure that major new pipeline projects and other projects throughout the country have a regulatory process behind them that enjoys the confidence of Canadians.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta attracts people from all across Canada to pursue opportunities for themselves and for their families. But hard-working Albertans are hit by this energy sector downturn the worst, including thousands of people in Lakeland. On this side, we know that impacts all sectors and all Canadians. A strong Alberta means a strong Canada. Mr. Speaker, I am proud of Alberta's world-leading energy sector. When is the Natural Resources Minister or any of the 4 Alberta Liberal MPs finally going to support Alberta's energy workers who contribute so much to Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Well, I thank the member for her question and her concern for Albertans, because I am, and the people I'm talking to, they're actually refreshed by the new approach of this government. We have a Prime Minister who's willing to engage with First Nations people, a Prime Minister who's willing to engage with premiers and other people on the ground to see that these projects get consensus. And I suspect she should come down to Calgary and talk to the people I'm not talking to. They're happy we're in charge.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The end of home mail delivery continues to anger many citizens. The new community mailboxes are a total fiasco. Frozen locks, no snow removal, security problems. We've even seen theft of mail. Now, the municipalities are asking that there be a legal obligation to consult them. Since the Prime Minister has not kept his promise to restore home mail delivery, can the Minister confirm that consultations will be open, accessible, and that the public will be consulted throughout the country?
The Minister of Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her question. And as we committed to in the election, we are going to ensure there is an independent review of Canada Post, which will look at whether or not there should have been installation of roadside mailboxes, which we had Canada Post put a stop to. because Canadians were not happy with that initiative. We are going to ensure that Canadians are consulted from coast to coast to coast, and we will ensure that it is an independent task force that actually undertakes this review.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, the Transportation Safety Board is reporting more derailments, runaway trains, and violations of rail safety rules, including exhausted engineers. Following the Lac-Mégantic disaster, rail companies were required to report on potential risks, the locations, and how they're being addressed. During the election, this government promised to increase transparency. Yet they're refusing to make public critical reports on rail risks from rail traffic. Will this minister today in this place commit to making public safety risks posed by rail operations across our nation?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for her question because rail safety is of paramount importance for this government. Recently, we took action against CP with respect to the issue of railway personnel fatigue. This is something that concerns us. There are far too many derailments occurring in this country. We have to improve rail safety. We are going to continue to work in that direction so that municipalities across this country feel that their rail system is secure. This is an undertaking from this government. Thank you.
The honourable member for Banff Airdrie.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Liberals' so-called changes, the Senate needs real reform. But instead, the Liberals have announced an unelected, unaccountable board that will be making secret recommendations for an unelected Senate. This advisory board will meet in secret, provide a non-binding shortlist in secret, where the Prime Minister will then choose from the list or not in secret. So I ask the Liberals, why the secrecy?
Now the Minister of Democratic Reform.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to announce on January 19th the appointments of the members of the Independent Advisory Board on Senate appointments, a critical step as the government begins the process of injecting a new spirit of non-partisanship in the Senate. The Advisory Board is led by the distinguished Canadian Order of Canada recipient, Huguette Lebel. The Advisory Board consists of a chair and ad hoc members for the provinces where the vacancies exist. We are confident that this process will lead to a less partisan and a more effective Senate.
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, everything about the Senate appointment process is secret. The secret list of candidates, secret advice is proffered secretly to the Prime Minister, who then uses Maxwell Smart's cone of silence to make his decision. Now, last year, an Angus Reid poll showed that 84% of Canadians, 84%, support either Senate elections or abolition. By contrast, in the same poll, 14% support appointments. So my question to the minister is, does she believe that all these layers of secrecy will boost that 14% support level?
Honourable Minister of Democratic Reform.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians mandate us to bring real change to the Senate, and we're doing that without opening up the Constitution. The Advisory Board will be guided by a public, merit-based criteria in order to identify Canadians who would make significant contributions to the work of the Senate.
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Mr. Speaker, I've got a copy of the Supreme Court report ruling right here, and it does not mention secrecy or mandate or require it. Mr. Speaker, on the subject of electoral reform, the last time a government in Canada changed the electoral system without a referendum was 1951, when British Columbia's Liberal government calculated that a preferential ballot would favour them and therefore imposed it on the province as a legally sanctioned way of rigging the 1952 election. Now, it didn't work for the Liberals then, thank goodness. They lost the election unexpectedly due to voter backlash. So trying to change the system without a referendum didn't work in 51. Why do they think it'll work now?
Honourable Minister of Democratic Reform.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish the member opposite a belated happy birthday and remind the members of this House that the conversation we are going to have about this very important reform is going to be more complex than a simple yes or a no answer. It's more complex than that. We have a tremendous opportunity to examine a variety of ways to ensure that Canadians feel fully engaged and are able to participate in our democracy. That's why we've committed.
The honourable member for Brampton East.
Mr. Speaker, an overwhelming number of my constituents in Brampton East are frustrated by the processing times for family and spousal sponsorships, citizen applications, PR renewals, and visitor visas. Can the Honourable Minister of Immigration please inform this House of the current processing times and reassure Canadians all across this nation that our government will reform the immigration program to ensure that it's fair, transparent, and works for all Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Speaker, I thank my colleague for his good question, and he's absolutely right that over the last decade, the processing times for family members have mushroomed to the point where the situation right now is a mess. Even for spouses, the processing time is typically 2 years versus 4 to 6 months in other countries. So you will know, Mr. Speaker, that my very top priority as Immigration Minister will be to bring these processing times substantially down over coming years.
Honourable member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this House, there's one person that knows something about conflict of interest, and it's the Minister of Agriculture. As a matter of fact, in 2002, he was forced to resign due to a conflict of interest. As a matter of fact, he was forced to resign as Solicitor General because it was found that the government had funneled money to the place in which his brother worked. Now, at the time, it was ruled that he, in fact, was in breach of his obligations. I'm wondering if the minister has learned from his past mistakes, if he'll stand in this House and admit that his current Chief of Staff is in a complete conflict of interest.
You bet. The Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Chief of Staff is extremely qualified for the job, and I'm proud that she has such a strong agricultural background. And I can assure my honourable colleague in this House that from day one, she was subject in my office to the Conflict of Interest Act, and she will also abide by any direction from the Ethics Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, the Catherine Spirit has been shipwrecked in Lac Saint-Louis near Beauharnois for 4.5 years. Elected officials and the public are increasingly worried about the situation because the boat is not being watched in any way. I've written 14 letters to various ministers for 4 years. I've proposed solutions. I've contacted recycling companies. Instead of doing like the Conservatives did and deny there's a problem, will the government now take action and move that boat?
Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another birthday. I'm proud to rise today on the 54th birthday of the Canadian Coast Guard. I'd like to take this opportunity to say happy birthday to all the dedicated women and men of the Canadian Coast Guard. I want to reassure the member, again as I did yesterday, and the public, that at the moment the Catherine Spirit is not discharging any pollutants. I will be working, I have been working with my colleague and seatmate, the Minister of Transportation, to assess the situation, and will develop plans as we move forward. Thank you.
Now the member for Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I rose in the House to talk about local food issues in my riding of Toronto Danforth. Canadians are concerned about the negative effects of consuming high levels of sodium and trans fats in their prepared foods. Can the Honourable Minister of Health please share with this House the government's plan to eliminate trans fats and reduce sodium in processed foods?
Now the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as my colleague, the honourable member knows, I've been a family doctor and have had many patients who have suffered the devastating consequences of heart disease and stroke. And so it is now my duty as Minister of Health to work with all Canadians to reduce the prevalence of these conditions. We will do so in part by reducing trans fats and reducing sodium intake. My department, Health Canada, has already introduced mandatory nutritional labelling guidelines in order to reduce trans fats, and will continue to work with the food industry and all Canadians to improve the health conditions of all Canadians.
Very good.
The honourable member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government is hurting the manufacturing sector with their job-killing carbon tax, increased payroll taxes, and support for increased energy costs. They ignored the sector in their speech from the throne, and the Prime Minister has even been quoted saying that Ontario needs to transition away from manufacturing. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's unacceptable. When will this government do the right thing, quit interfering, and support the auto manufacturing industry so that it can create well-paying middle-class jobs in communities like Oshawa?
The honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. As we know, this government recognizes that the automotive sector is a very important sector in Canada, employing almost 500,000 people. We will as we develop the government's innovation agenda, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with our partners to build a stronger automotive and manufacturing sector in this country. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, in her report, the Environment Commissioner is categorical, and I quote, "The National Energy Board did not appropriately provide oversight on the conditions for approval of pipelines, nor provide effective follow-up on any lack of respect for these conditions." The Energy East pipeline has been categorically rejected by over half the population of Quebec. Under these circumstances, the Prime Minister has no other choice than to show leadership. Will he make a decision or ignore the will of Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I met with the Commissioner, as did my colleague, the Minister of Energy. The National Committee told us that they would accept the results of the report and are implementing solutions right now. Thank you. I would like to remind members that they should not refer to the names of members, but only the names of the ridings or their titles. The honourable member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, when BC says no to Northern Gateway, they're listened to. When the Americans say no to Keystone, they're being listened to. But when 82 cities representing 4 million Quebecers do their homework and say no to Energy East, they're insulted, they're shown contempt, and they're threatened. When will the Prime Minister take off his referee jersey in order to save time and understand that Trans-Canada pipeline projects in Quebec meet with a resounding no?
Speaker, it would be interesting to compare the positions from the three parties opposite to what we are advocating, which is to consult Canadians about a process that will lead to these major projects that are important for the future of the Canadian economy, to carry the confidence of Canadians without trying to divide Canadians by sector, by region, or by politics.
This will end question period for today. I have a point of order from the opposition leader of the official opposition, the House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I could get unanimous consent of the House to table some documents that were released during the election, so maybe the Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Finance, hasn't had a chance to read them. They are the Department of Finance fiscal updates in both official languages, showing that the Conservative government left the Liberals with a surplus.